This is the last of the 4 talk set, Fascism, yesterday, today, and at this stage, I'm going to bring this closer to home here, if you want to use that term. What we call hate groups, which according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, in 2000 there were 602 such groups. Now there's 1,020. And you've seen a pickup in these groups ever since 2008, the first year of the Obama administration. Of course, I think, I'm not saying that the Obama administration, since we've had a black president here, didn't instill in these groups, or people that have affinity for these groups, a reason to justify a collection here of these groups. I think part of it too is after the 2008 mortgage crisis, I think some people economically felt impacted too, and that there is really, what you have in Washington now is not really geared to helping the common everyday Joe. And the reason I say that is that some groups that are considered hate groups, you can call that one into question too. Now, I'm not defending them, but I'm just saying have a broader thought process towards them. Groups like the 3 Percenters or the Oath Keepers, which do not, the Oath Keepers in particular here, do not consider themselves a militia group. They just feel that we have gotten away from the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and they have a more proactive outlook on trying to get us back to it. Again, I don't put them in the same class as groups like Daily Stormer, Vanguard America, which on that handout needs to be updated because Vanguard America is no longer Vanguard America. It's called Patriot Front. Some of the people are the same. They've just changed the name. And the reason they changed the name, I'm sure one of the main reasons they changed the name is if you go back to Charlottesville in 2017, if you remember there was a young lady named Heather Heyer that was run over by that car and killed. James Alex Fields did that. He was sentenced to jail time. He came out of Vanguard America. And I'm going to also go over, and this group vehemently denies this, Act for America. I don't know how many are familiar with that. Their shtick is being vehemently anti-Muslim. Vehemently anti-Muslim. Groups like Daily Stormer, Vanguard America, or Patriot Front, Identity Europa, these groups are more to what you call, fall more aligned with groups like hate groups, neo-Nazi, neo-fascist. Vanguard of America, interestingly enough, believed in a uniparty state, a single party. If your religion wasn't from Europe, get out. They're not a big fan of Jewish people. They're not a big fan of Latinos. Obviously not a big fan of blacks. They're not a big fan of Muslims. I don't even think they like their own mothers, some of these people. But they do get adherents. Act for America is interesting. It was formed in 2007 by a lady by the name of Bridget Gabriel, who was actually a Lebanese Christian. Now, this isn't to say this lady didn't see things in Lebanon. That's not to say this at all. But the interesting aspect here is, and I brought here something interesting. Some of the people involved in Act for America I found interesting here. This is from Bridget Gabriel herself. Practicing Muslim who believes the word of the Quran to be the word of Allah, who goes to mosque and prays every Friday, who prays 5 times a day, this practicing Muslim who believes the teaching of the Quran cannot be a loyal citizen of the United States. Now, she says this in an address during a course at the Department of Defense's Joint Forces Staff College. America has been, get this one, America has been infiltrated on all levels by radicals who wish to harm America. They have infiltrated us at the CIA, at the FBI, at the Pentagon, at the State Department. They are being radicalized in radical mosques in our cities and communities within the United States. What does that sound a little like if you go back into history? The McCarthy era? Remember that? Our government's been infiltrated by communists. Same story, different rationale here. Interesting where, now this is before the Heritage Foundation panel. This is in 2014. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25% of the Muslim world to all intelligence services around the world. That leaves 75% of them peaceful people. But when you look at the 15 to 25% of the world Muslim population, you are looking at 180 to 300 million people dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. If you believe that. Now, these are two gentlemen I focus on here because when I gave this talk over at the Fairfield Bigelow Center, a person from Act for America showed up. In fact, they contacted the Fairfield Senior Center, and about 4 or 5 times by phone call and email, not wanting me to talk about this. In fact, when I got there, they expected to see some protesters outside, and nobody showed up. One lady did, and she tried to debate me during the, this was a 2-hour talk, by the way. She tried to debate me in the middle, and at the break. And interesting here, because I brought up the point of these two people. You're not a hate group, because they said the Southern Poverty Law Center was a hate group. But then again, the Anti-Defamation League holds them in the same classification. So does Human Rights Watch. It's more than just a Southern Poverty Law Center. This is a man by the name of Charles Fuqua, who at the time in 2016 was the ACT chapter leader for the Batesville, Arkansas Act for America chapter. I maintain that to believe in Islam is to be a traitor to the United States. I think we need to wake up and get rid of the traitorous people. How do you do that? This one was a year later from a Frank Thibodeau from Portland, Maine. Again, the director of Act for America in that area of that state. Islam is a supremacist, totalitarian, political ideology masquerading as a religion. It's as dangerous as Nazism or communism and must be eradicated. And you're going to hear that name again because he writes under a name known as Charles Martel. And that's going to pop up again with Daily Stormer. Now, this group, Act for America, is not like the slam bang type that like to go to these ultra-rightist rallies and so on and so forth and mix it up in the streets. It doesn't seem like they're that type because Bridget Gabriel is an ardent supporter of the Trump administration and has dinner with the Trumps. She also has relations with Senator Peter King and other high-ranking elected officials, although to the right. And so they are not the street people. They are more refined in their approach. But their main shtick here is that they are anti-Islamic. Now, another interesting thing, and I got this right off Act of America's website. I got this on March 19, 2019. Act for America. Act for America's mission is to educate, engage, train, and mobilize citizens and elected officials to impact legislative outcomes and ensure the safety and security of Americans against all threats, foreign and domestic, while preserving civil liberties guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. What happened to the freedom of religion here? Somebody has to ask that question. Now, just as a side note, as I was doing a little bit of research on this, remember Pat Robertson, the 700 Club? Remember that Orlando, I mean, this shows you what, not only groups, but individuals. Pat Robertson, 700 Club, following the Orlando Gay Club massacre, remember that one? The LGBT rights advocates have joined, get this, have joined radical Islamists and are now reaping what they have sowed. That's Pat Robertson. You know, it's amazing where this goes here. It truly is. There's a group here, you know, the Southern Poverty Law Center says there's around six or so hate groups in Connecticut. I'm sure you're aware of the Ku Klux Klan used to be up in the valley up there, near Merritt and places like that. And I remember when I used to be a competitive shooter, this fellow Frank Scotto, who was a heck of a nice guy, he was a gunsmith and a darn good one. Learned his trade in the Army. I mean, he'd build you a barrel from scratch. And I called him up because I said I needed this long barrel on my single-shot handgun. I was competing with single-shot handguns. You know, these are the type of guns you're not going to go into the bank and stick it up. That's not going to happen. And so I went up to Frank called me up and says, "Mark, your barrel's ready. Come on up." I said, "All right, I'll come up." He says, "But be advised," because he says, "When you want to come up?" And well, Saturday, such and such a date. He says, "Well, keep in mind, Mark, we have a rally up here." I said, "Oh, what kind of rally?" I thought maybe I'd watch. I'm not politically interested anyway. He goes to KKK. I said, "Oh," because I had to pass the field they were going to meet on the way to Frank's home to go pick up my barrel. And so I figured, okay, I'll go up anyway. I don't care. So I get up there, and sure enough, I get up there, and there's 12 bedsheet-wearing guys with the American flag, and I'm thinking there would be a lot of people up here, you know, protesting this. There was 12 of them with a microphone, right? Little podium, and there were about 100 or so people, all cops. All cops. State police and Meriden City Police. Nobody else was there. That was the rally. So I got to Frank's house. He says, "Do you see the rally?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Frank, there must have been about 115 people there." He goes, "Let me guess, about 100 of them were cops, the rest were," he says, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Standard procedure." However, that's the KKK. That's not some of these other groups that Southern Poverty Law Center says exist in Connecticut. One of them is, get this title, the Nuwaubian Nation of the Moors. How many here have ever heard of a group like that? I'm not surprised if you haven't. They're an interesting group. They were based out of Hartford. Their agenda is based on a cocktail of black supremacy, adoration of ancient Egyptians and their pyramids, regard for UFOs, and conspiracies involving the Bilderbergers and Illuminati. Now, this group is not new. It was formed in 1970. And it used to be run by a man by the name of Dwight York, who, last I know, was still serving prison time for a variety of good reasons here. The group was founded in 1970 as a black nationalist group. This group is the quintessential expression of people looking to participate in something because they can't think for themselves. Remember the Jim Jones syndrome here? Remember people drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Mass suicide here. Oh, that doesn't happen here. But the agenda here is people who can't think for themselves who gravitate to an organization here. And this is it. And this Dwight York, you know, catered to these people from that agenda. Of course, what do you think he's doing to them? Taking their money, their property, and sexually abusing not only them, but in some cases their children. I mean, he is a bad scene, this guy. He truly was. In 1983, he opened up an 80-acre site, guess where? In the Catskill Mountains. He built a facility, 80-acre facility, called Camp Yagir. He spent $5 million on his mansion. Now, do you think his followers have rooms in this mansion? No, they're either living in tents, hovels, or out in the open here on the property. And interestingly enough, some people were living in trailers. He opened up another one in Georgia, Putnam County, Georgia, a 476-acre site. Even built 2 pyramids. Papier-mâché pyramids here, this guy did. And he had 400 of his followers living nearby. Well, guess what's going to happen to him eventually? The law is going to catch up with him. And I found out interesting here, years of child molestation and sexual abuse of followers caught up with Dwight York. On May 16, 2002, federal authorities indicted him on 120 counts of child molestation, and related charges of sexual perversion. He was sentenced in 2004 to 135 years of prison charges, which included racketeering. And yet, interesting, 5 years later, 300 or 400 of his followers would descend on the Macon federal court to petition for his release. You know, it's interesting here how one person can influence a mass because this mass can't think for themselves. Sounds like the Manson case, Jim Jones. Someone said, well, yeah. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, it's astounding here. As alluded to above, and I note here, the New Wahbians have a convoluted dogma, yet are extremists in opposition to the white race. For guess what Dwight York once said? White people are the devil. They say the New Wahbians are not. They say the New Wahbians are not racist. Bullcrap. I am. White people are devils. Always was. Always will be. And that was Dwight York from a lecture, Egypt and the Mass of God. But the group I really wanted to spend a little time on here, before I get into the whys and wherefores here, is Daily Stormer. I find that one of the more interesting groups of this entire process here. Daily Stormer was started in 2013 by a man by the name of Andrew Anglin. His previous effort was known as Total Fascism. Total Fascism. Yet in high school, he was a liberal. Went from the left to the right. Yeah, sounds like Mussolini, doesn't it? From socialism to fascism. Interesting. And he, by the way, when he starts this website, is very much, it's neo-Nazi, white supremacist. They don't like blacks, they don't like Jewish people, again, they don't like Muslims, so on and so forth. And yet, interestingly enough, the name itself, Daily Stormer, it's reputed that they got the name from Der Stürmer. Julius Streicher was really a low-rent, belly-scraping, bottom-feeding blowhard. That's really what he was, of a most pornographic variety with that periodical Daily Stormer. They used to depict the Jewish people in the most pornographic, compromising positions to lower their stature among the balance of the German nation. Andrew Anglin stated, you know, the day after Trump got elected, and I used to visit that site just to see what they were doing. Among some of these other sites, they're fascinating to read if you're not the kind of enjoyable reading, I guess, but to understand what's going on with these people. That when Trump was elected, God Emperor. Get a load of that one. And Andrew Anglin stated that he had supported Trump for 17 months prior to the election. 17 months. Interesting here, and I took a quote here because Daily Stormer, Der Stürmer, again, this going back to Julius Streicher for a moment, and I called the Der Stürmer a low-rent publication with the most pornographic approach to its anti-Jewish content. Julius Streicher, a vulgar smut peddler who once wrote, get this, the male sperm in cohabitation of a Jew with an Aryan woman is sufficient to poison her blood forever. Never again will she be able to bear purely Aryan children. Even when married to an Aryan, they will all be bastards. That's Julius Streicher. Wow. And so interesting here, even after Trump gets elected, following the election, this is what appears on the Daily Stormer website. Female Hajis fear to wear the head towel in public after Trump win. And another rant Anglin penned, fear, now is the time for it. We want these people to feel unwanted. We want them to feel that everything around them is against them, and we want them to be afraid. He wrote that on his site. Now that goes back to what, not that maybe he ever read this, but it does go back to what Hitler once stated in Mein Kampf. Terror has its uses. Terror in the workplace. Terror in the streets. And the only way terror is met and neutralized is counter-terror. That was Hitler. Interesting here. Fascinating. He has, or he had anyway with his site, a troll army. These were people, if they found somebody they wanted to attack, all the followers, or as many as possible, they'd organize them to attack them via phone, internet, tweet, so on and so forth. I mean, they would really gang up on them. In fact, at one point here, I found this fascinating, that after the defeat of Hillary Clinton, Anglin writes, "We won, brothers. Our glorious leader has ascended to God Emperor." Get a load of this stuff. Make no mistake about it. We did this. In other words, Daily Stormer did this. Well, yeah. If it were not for us, it would not have been possible. He's raising the stature of his followers here. Man, this guy's a sawdust Caesar. This was followed by a banner on the website, and I've seen this banner. The Daily Stormer, get this, America's #1 most trusted Republican news source. Talk about a minnow trying to be a whale here. First in facts, first in integrity. And included on this banner, it was like a blood red band, bright red banner. On one side was a picture of Reagan. On the starboard side was a picture of Trump, the faces. And of course, there are people who are going to believe this garbage. Now, they even, even in Connecticut, they have a Connecticut tag. And you can go into your computer when you go home, and you can find this stuff. It's not like it's a convoluted search here. It truly isn't. And in 2018, there was a murder up there. A lady's name was Lydia Torillo. She was 44 years old, lady in Hartford. She was murdered. And according to this, according to what I found in the Hartford Current, it was a man by the name of Byron Perry. He was a 28-year-old black guy. Now, you would think here on the Hartford Current, Hartford man arrested in connection with murder. That's the kind of headline you expect to see, right, from a respectable newspaper. Well, guess what I found on Daily Stormer? Get a load of this one. This is their headline. Hartford primate ape rested. Not arrested, ape rested. And not in connection, in connection. Yeah, that went out. That went out. Another one here. There was a murder of a 20-year-old Hartford school teacher, Danielle Fasciocco. Apprehended for the grisly deed was one Cornell Myers, the other black guy, charged with murder, first-degree burglary, and first-degree trespassing. Daily Stormer's headline on this for Connecticut, October 5, 2018, begins with, Afro-anthropoid charged with murder of white school teacher. Do you get the racial aspects of this here? And we'd have to be deaf, dumb, and stupid not to get that, right? And so, again, and then guess who's credited with this? Charles Martel wrote both these stories. And as far as my research tells me, Charles Martel was Frank Thibodeau from Portland, Maine, who was a director for Maine Act. And I brought this up to that lady. Well, I never heard of him. I said, well, you better get with the program. I said, if you're not a hate group, you better start weeding out people like him and just Charles Fuqua. And then maybe you can get off the list. You get off the lists. And so interesting here, when you look at Charlottesville, groups like Daily Stormer, who were, Andrew Anglin wasn't there that day, but other high-ranking representatives of other groups were, like at that time Vanguard America, I believe Identity Europa was there. I mean, there's a lot of these groups. I mean, your eyes can cross when you look at these groups. You know, the names, this alphabet soup of hate groups here. And interesting here, Andrew Anglin, Breitbart News. Some of these groups supported Breitbart News because of what? They're alt-right, right? They're to the right of way to the right of center. Well, Breitbart News opened up. Guess what? They opened up an office in Jerusalem. Well, aren't they supposed to be a news bureau? Yeah, they are, right? Well, wouldn't they, if you were really a news bureau, wouldn't you want to open up a news bureau perhaps in Jerusalem to get Middle East news? That didn't set well with some of the extreme right here, like Daily Stormer. And Andrew Anglin went in on the attack. So there's a division now between Breitbart News and Daily Stormer. Of course, this goes back a couple, 3 years ago. And guess what he did? He called out his cyber troll army to attack Breitbart News. And they weren't kidding. They were not kidding. I found this interesting here, Stormer Troll Army. And this is what he writes at one point, urging Breitbart News to stop shilling for Jews and close down the New Jerusalem office. But what's really galling here, you would have thought, and he assigns a name to this operation to attack Breitbart News. You would have thought it might have been something like what? Operation Breitbart? No. Get a load of this. Operation Kikebart. These people, some of these people aren't kidding here. They are not kidding. Wow, Kikebart. Now you're probably thinking, well, what happened to the companies that allow websites to operate on their servers, right? Wouldn't you think that? The Unite the Right march or meeting, you know, this I call it a Munich rally in Charlottesville, North Carolina, you know, to offset the left that had taken to the streets here. There were people like Richard Spencer, Michael Enoch, Matthew Heimbeck, Eli Mosley, David Duke. These are big names in the right movement. However, when that lady was run over and killed by James Alex Field, guess what appears on Daily Stormer site? Andrew Anglin himself on Daily Stormer website penned, "Woman killed in road rage incident was a fat, childless 32-year-old slut." In the body of the article, a 32-year-old woman without children is a burden on society. What does that tell you about the stature of women with some of these people here? And this now we're getting into the year where, what's the centennial of women's right to vote? And interesting too, and she was fat and a drain on society. That's what she said. She was fat and a drain on society. And she was too fat to dodge a Dodge. Offered as well with such advertising advice. He even gives advertising advice for Chrysler. Promoting roadkill nights. And the Challenger, the Dodge Challenger, the Challenger is a fatty smasher. And of course, one sales slogan was, 2 words, Dodge this. It's finally after things like this that GoDaddy yanked them, which is a big sponsor of websites. In fact, that's the one they're building one for me right now. They yanked them. WordPress yanked, or Namecheap yanked them. And so now Daily Stormer was like nomadic. They were hopping from server to server to server to keep getting their message out. They went to Poland, they went to Russia, they went to the Fiji Islands to do this, just to keep the website up. But they want that message out. Social media, you know, the phone, the computer, tweets, so on and so forth. But the question you have to ask here, and this is really the gist of this. I mean, we can go on with these groups all darn day, but what's that going to say? Why do you have such groups? I mean, you had the John Birchers years ago, didn't you? I remember them as a kid. Weren't they to the right of center? Yeah. Didn't you still have the socialists? Didn't you still have the Communist Party USA? I remember when there were some in Congress that wanted to outlaw that party. You know who was against outlawing it? J. Edgar Hoover. He says, if you outlaw it, they'll go underground and it'll make it harder for me to keep an eye on them. Look how he's viewing it from his perspective. That's an interesting approach. Maybe the right one, perhaps? Now, if you recall, when the communists, remember Gus Hall, who was their perennial presidential candidate? Of course, did he ever really get far? No, but they ran him. You know, they didn't run a candidate in 2016, you know, the Communist Party. They supported one in that election. You know who they supported? Hillary Clinton. Now, I'm sure if Hillary decides she wants to run again, she's not going to put that down on her resume of support, because they considered Trump a fascist. In no way, shape, or form were they going to vote for him. And I guess they didn't think Jill Stein had a chance, which she probably didn't. Or Gary Johnson, if you remember him. So they voted for Hillary. So they urged their supporters to vote for Hillary Clinton. A splinter group from the Communist Party USA is the Radical Communists, and they ran a candidate. They didn't get anywhere, but they ran a candidate. But you know, I'm thoroughly convinced that years ago, I remember growing up as a kid. Yeah, you had the socialists, and I heard of them, socialist, communists, the John Birchers. I used to hear my father talk about them. But interesting here, when you have the two main parties here, which are the only two parties that really matter, Democrats and Republicans, and coming out of 1945, World War II, many of your elected officials had been World War II veterans. Of course, you're talking about a country at a time when you had what? The giant community scene. And if you remember, there was a word that used to resonate here called compromise. How's that working now? How's that working now? And so here you saw many people, some of these people who were communist or socialist, or let's go to the Birchers, we're not going to get anywhere. So who did they join? Democrats and Republicans, right? Didn't they form an extreme left or extreme right base here? Yeah, but they knew they weren't going to get anywhere. They're deluded by a functioning system they're a functioning party system. You don't have that now. The World War II generation in Congress, what's happened to that? It's gone. It's gone. And so this isn't the only reason, but to me it's a large reason why you don't have compromise like we would want, or why we don't have a functioning system of representative government. Part of it, too, is globalization. You know, in 1945, America was the only game in town. Politically, economically, militarily. We had the bomb, didn't we? 45? Yeah, until 49. We had the monopoly on it. It was nice to have the monopoly. But let's understand something. If you don't know anything from history, do you think that's going to last forever? I mean, militarily speaking, somebody was going to get the bomb. Many major countries knew about this going back to there were scientists who knew this was possible going back to the 19th century. Atomic energy. It's just you didn't have the technology yet or the expertise to get there. You will in the 40s, though. French knew about it, the Italians knew about it, the British knew about it, the Germans knew about it, the Russians knew about it. They knew this was possible. It was just a question of who's going to get there first. We do. Of course, we have the money and the capacity to not only build the bomb, but drop it, use it. But that monopoly eventually ran out. And I'm sure you remember those days when who was buying whose cars? They were buying our cars. Remember that? Our washing machines, our stoves, our radios, our television sets. But you can't expect that to last forever. And it didn't. Those were the days, too, when you came out of the war. You know, you went to school in the GI Bill or whatever the case may be. You wound up with a nice middle-class life, and you worked 30, 35 years at a company, you retired, and you got a good pension, right? What happened with that one now? That's been pressured here. Stressed. Why? Again, globalization. Countries are catching up. The Europeans, the Japanese, now India, now China. Well, okay, so she says Taiwan. Now you're getting into smaller entities like Taiwan. South Korea? Yeah, they're looking to compete too, you know. They're looking to compete too. And so now you've got all these kibitzers in the game. Well, what's that done to the American job market? I remember as a traffic manager for the Faro Corporation in Norwalk, and I saw the slaughter of the trucking companies in the 1980s. When companies like HD, Caddy, and everything moved out of Norwalk. I mean, Norwalk was an industrial town. Now, and so I saw the death of these trucking companies like Gardella Transportation, Valerie Brothers, Quinn, and larger companies like Worcester, which bought out by North Penn. I remember when Roadway almost collapsed. Roadway. It was a horror show. It was a horror show. In fact, the place I was the traffic manager, they closed it up and they closed it down. And that's understandable. And so interesting, where did some of these jobs go? Overseas, right? Why would they want to pay an American worker $25 an hour when they can get Stosh to do it or Hop Singh to do it for $1 an hour? Why would they want to pay you $25? You know what GM did at one point? It was costing GM $7,000 a year just for the medical insurance for one worker. So where did they go? At one point they go to Canada, right? Where they have what? National health insurance there? Single payer, whatever you want to call it. And you know what it cost GM after that? $1,000 a year. Why would you produce here? Right? Looking at it from that perspective. And so when you take a look at your politics, and I remember seeing as a young Republican, even going back to the Reagan years, I remember seeing, and you know, this was beginning not to look like the Republican Party my mother and father were in. You know, even during the Reagan years, the party was admitting ultra-nationalists, racists, and people I used to characterize as of questionable religious character. And every time they wanted somebody to represent their interests, like a Huckabee or a Santorum, the party always came up with a Reagan, a Bush Sr. Remember when Bob Dole ran against Clinton? Bush Jr., Mitt Romney, John McCain, somebody who would be more acceptable on a wider platform here of people. 2016, it didn't work because they didn't cater to that agenda. You saw a backlash in 2010 with the Tea Party, didn't you? Weren't they to the right? But they're not Daily Stormer. They are not Identity Europa. They are not Patriot Front. True, they were to the right, but they weren't groups like this. So where have we gone even since 2010? Even more to the right. Of course, again, even in the 90s when Clinton was president, Bill Clinton, and I like telling this to Democrats because he was one of the worst presidents we ever had. He savaged the FCC down to the point where we no longer have controls. If you own a TV station, radio stations in a certain district, you can't own print matter. Or if you own the print matter, you can't own any matter, like you can't own any news outlets like TV and radio. Now you can. What's happened to media in this country? You got 6 owners of it. And boy, that's questionable substance. You know, and in fact, I remember I bought this series. CBS is a case in point. CBS, they used to have some good shows you could learn something from. I remember they ran a 26-week series narrated by Robert Ryan called World War I. It's an excellent documentary. You think they'll show that anymore? Why would they want to do that for? That's just one example. You think you're going to see The World at War narrated by Laurence Olivier on Channel 2, 4, 7, CNN, MSNBC, or forget Fox. You're not going to see these types of shows for the most part. What are you going to see? Infotainment, info news. News from the perspective that, you know, we got to have people who are dressed to the nines. We have to have raise the voices. We can't have real discussions anymore. It's the dumbing down process. And so when you have people like in these hate groups who feel they are ostracized from their economy because their jobs have gone where? Ostracized from their politics, ostracized from society. You going to invite somebody from Daily Stormer over your house next Sunday for dinner? They're going to go to groups or entities they're going to feel welcome. And of course, when you don't have a functioning system of representative government, you don't have a functioning economy, you don't have a I remember growing up on Howard Avenue during the 60s in East Norwalk. It was the typical post-World War II middle-class neighborhood. You know, as boys, I won't count the girls because I don't know what they were watching. But I know all of us boys were watching John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, Gary Cooper, The Lone Ranger with Clayton Moore, Hopalong Cassidy, and your dad won World War II. How tough is life? My kids can never say that. They will never. My granddaughters, forget it. Although my wife and I made an effort to, especially me from the perspective, I made sure my kids saw Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, and the Marx Brothers, the Honeymooners. You know, I made sure they saw that stuff. Yeah. I had one guy say, one of the teachers wrote home, you had your kids brought up on this? He said, boy, you did something right. One teacher in particular, because my oldest son, Michael, the teacher would make a comment when he was like, you know, this was in narrow-make grade school, and one kid got it, Michael. And this teacher told my wife, she said, I made a reference to Abbott and Costello, and your son was the only one who got it. And she said, my wife says, well, you know, I have a husband home. Who's on first, what's on second, I don't know who's on third. But to me, that used to be, for want of a better description, wholesome stuff. It was simple. Right, left, black, white, right, wrong, that kind of, that's not that way anymore. Now, maybe some of that wasn't a reality here, but it was enjoyable to a certain extent. We weren't laughing at other misfortunes, perhaps. We were laughing at ourselves. I mean, watch The Honeymooners. Isn't that what that show is about? To a large extent, we're laughing at ourselves. The Lucy Show, we're laughing at ourselves. It's a different world today. Kind of did coincide with America at that point. It did coincide with America at that point. But now you had a more cohesive country. But I remember growing up in East Norwalk in the early mid-60s as a kid, and half the neighborhood, half the homes had a gun or guns. Yet no one shot up the local schoolyard, no one stuck up the corner store, and no one established a beachhead on our front lawn. It's more than the gun, it's society. I'm convinced of that. But do people need an AK-47 to defend their home? Of course not. That's not the point. The point here is I'm bringing forward is society. How many people really trust their politicians anymore? What is the approval rating of Congress? That's another issue here. Are people, more and more of our fellow citizens, lacking faith, not just in Congress, but in the institution of representative government? Because if you're seeing that, what do you think is going to happen with groups like this? Red states versus blue states? George Washington warned against factionalism. Does that lead to opportunities for opportunists? Yes. Look at Mussolini, look at Hitler, look at Stalin. People like this. Or people like Jim Jones here, taking advantage of people who really aren't really taught to think for themselves. I always remember my father telling me, a World War II veteran, when he told me, he says, this stuff about the veteran being the best protector of the country, he said, that's a lot of hogwash. He said, the best protection is an educated population. And he always told me, he says, if you don't have an educated population, or a population that can't get itself out of the fix it got itself into, it's going to resort to the veteran. To me, this is simple stuff. And yet, you take a look at the American population today, half of it is on an 8th grade reading level or less. So how do you expect a functioning system of representative government? So you get people who are in government at this point who simplify a message that appeals to the gut instead of the gray matter. And it works. Look at Hitler. You say the same lie long enough, and what happens? It becomes truth. Perception is reality here. You know, is this becoming reality? It's been reality for a while. And so when you see what's going on here now with Ukraine and Biden, you know, this situation here, is it sickening to listen to? Yeah, yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. But you know, there's more to this coming. You know there is. But the fact of the matter is, you no longer have a functioning system of representative government. That's the big issue here. You don't have a functioning economy. I mean, I heard when Trump, you know, 3.6% unemployment rate. Now, really? What's the real unemployment rate? Or even when Obama, I remember, was 4.6%, and Himes was over at Norwalk Community College. Jim Himes was over there with a town meeting on the economy, and I remember asking him about 4.6%. Then perhaps you can answer me a question. Sure, what's that? I said, I went to the Fed. I always do when presidents come out with this stuff. You know, you begin that economic chase here. And I always go to the Fed, and the first thing I take a look at is capacity utilization. Capacity utilization is the output of the nation's mines and factories. And at 4.6% unemployment rate, 22.9% of the nation's tables, chairs, and desks, and word processors, computers, assembly lines, anything having to do with production was sitting idle. How does that square with a 4.6% unemployment rate? And then when Trump came out, the Trump administration came out with 3.6%, 22% of it still sitting idle. That's not the only barometer you can use, but then you begin to look at other barometers. It ain't working. It's not working. In fact, I was looking at another one by the Commerce Department. Get a load of this one. Get a load of this one. In 1977, you know, when I hear this stuff, it's not just Trump, it's Obama and all these other caretakers of the corporate state. You know, I went back to the Commerce Department. In 1977, for every 100,000 people, there were 257 business startups. In 1992, for every 100,000 people, there were 181 business startups. In 2015, for every 100,000 people, there were 129 business startups. We're an innovative country? Really? And so in 2015, 2016, Commerce Department again, small business. Keep in mind, this is 2015, 2016, you know, when Obama bailed out the banks, which AIG didn't need to be bailed out. The only part of AIG that was failing were the derivatives, you know, the bets. And 755 billion assigned to this TARP. Only 1 billion went to small business. That's it. And so when you look at 2015, 2016, and during the Obama years, the Fed pumped in $4.5 trillion into the economy. $4.5 trillion. Yet, 32% of small businesses couldn't get a loan. 25% of them opted for a personal loan. for their business. You see something wrong here? I sure as heck do. And so when I hear these, gee, the economy's doing great, really? Explain this to me. I just don't get it. And so when you really get into this and begin to take this apart, then you wonder why you have groups like Daily Stormer, the Three Percenters, groups like this. And the more you have a society and a government and a political structure that doesn't work, the more radicalization you're going to get. You would think 1918, 1919, 1922 Italy, 1933 would resonate here. But do we teach it? And that I find a problem. That I find a problem. And by all definitions here, the basic definition, I've heard this too, that, Trump's a fascist, so on and so forth. He does have fascist tendencies, I'll give you that. But at the same time, the definition of a corporate fascist state, we already fill that basis. We already do. We have for years. Large corporations, large financial institutions run your economy. That's what comes out of the April 1927 Charter of the Worker by Benito Mussolini. You are already there. The question is, who's gonna run it? Interesting here where this has gone. Interesting where this has gone, because when you go back to things like the Lewis Powell memo of August 1971, that's an interesting read. You should read that. I call it the Manifesto of American Fascism. It's here where a lot of these conservative think tanks really begin to sprout, and something else comes up. Political action committees, followed by things like the Paul Wolfowitz's Doctrine of Preemptive War, the 1997 Plan for the New American Century, the neocons' agenda for the American military in the 21st century, the Patriot Act, the 2002 National Security Strategy, Citizens United here. What happened to the Constitution and Bill of Rights? Again, you don't have a functioning system of representative government. When was the last president to go before Congress and ask for a declaration of war? And then Ed Snowden comes out as a whistleblower and is accused of being a spy. He's warning you that the NSA and the security services are absconding with your emails and reading your phone mail. That's in violation of the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. You are supposed to be protected in your personal effects. The government wants them, get a warrant. That's what he's telling you, and he's right. So Washington can say whatever they want about him. It's a lot of hogwash. In fact, I just watched a two-episode interview with him. He would contemplate coming back here if he would get a fair trial to outline his views, and I don't think Washington's ready for that. Interesting here, and he talked about companies like Booz Allen and companies like this, because a lot of your government services, especially like with the intelligence sector, have been farmed out to companies. He even explained about Google, to show you the power of Google. They save a lot of your emails and everything else that you communicate with. They don't make money off that per se from you. What they do is they farm them out to the government and to other companies. They're selling your information. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. Draw up a profile on you. That's what some other analysts have said. They've got so many millions of people. How much of this stuff can you store? But the problem with the NSA is, if you read their charter, they were not designed for internal surveillance. They were designed for external surveillance. So why are they surveilling you? Oh, which means they don't trust the government. The government doesn't trust you. Neither did the founders. That's why they installed the checks and balances. James Madison once said, if people were angels, you wouldn't need a government. They knew human nature to that regard, that's for sure. Yes? Sounds like the Hunchback of Notre Dame on top of Notre Dame Cathedral. Remember that with the molten metal? Remember that? Yeah. Well, you know, I remember the armory in Norwalk. It was at the bottom of the hill from Norwalk Hospital. Yeah, I remember that. Of course, that's long gone. It's up, you know, the National Guard's up on Route 123. But yeah, and so as you become more of a global power, you see this separation between the people and their government grow. And you can go back to, I always go back to NSA 47, National Security Act 1947, when we fashioned our military for the post-World War II era, and there's no longer a War Department. There's now the Department of the Army. The Navy Department's now the Department of the Navy. The Air Force was taken away from the Army, and now you have the Department of the Air Force. You now have a CIA. You didn't have that anymore. You didn't have that. You had the OSS during the war, but you now have a bona fide intelligence service. And something else is put together here known as the National Security Advisors, the NSC. And, you know, who, again, National Security Council, who are not elected officials. And so instead of Congress interacting with the president interacts with his advisors in the NSC. And this is why you're going to have an intelligence community in the House, so on and so forth. But again, if you don't have president declaring war anymore, have you strengthened the hold on foreign policy with regards to the White House at the expense of the people you elect? Yeah. So it's interesting why people are becoming less enamored, perhaps, with representative government. Well, how do we solve that problem? Somebody who has a strong hand? I mean, is that what you want? I mean, history should show unequivocally what happens when somebody with a strong hand or a dictator eventually gets power. This is old news, and it's not fake news either. This stuff is true. In fact, even go back to Russia in 2013, they took a poll. There were still 28% of Russians who wanted another Stalin back because he represented order. What happened to all those people in the gulags? You know. And so it's going to be interesting to see here where this current situation goes, and are we going to see impeachment procedure really go ahead here? And that's another part of this, red states versus blue states. I mean, you have a country now where some of these people in the middle of the country just don't trust the coast anymore. The elites, they don't trust. And there is a basis of understanding this. Although I always say they leave one color out, and that color is green. Money. And to me, that's Washington should be green because of all the money that goes into this place. It's obscene. It truly is. And I remember writing a commentary one time. I said, Washington, D.C.? Oh, yeah, that's that off-ramp on 95 between Sodom and Gomorrah. And I had some politicians that didn't like that remark. Gee, that's just too bad. To me, that's what it is. So, anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes? Or Richard C. Hodelet or somebody like that. Those people seem to be gone. Well, I mean, the problem here is we don't have a balance of views on the news. When was the last time you saw Noam Chomsky on Channel 2? When was the last time you saw Chris Hedges on Channel 7? Yeah, I think you're going to see this with the young as they create their own politics and their own economy, because they're going to have to. They have no choice. They're not going to rely on currently what exists. They can't, because it's not going to work for them. You know, the object of the exercise for them is, I mean, when you go back to the last election, November 2016, 46.7% didn't vote. You know, only 53.3% did. But they were activated, many of them. And having said that, I mean, it sounds like you're in the same generation I am here, baby boomer generation. And I always contend that many of our fellow people in that generation, many of them went from Woodstock to bank stock, and they've sold out. And so in that case, they've even sold out their own kids and their grandkids. And so then you wonder why you have 16-year-old kids in Florida trying to form a group to take guns off the street because their parents are failures. They are. They're failures. And so now you're seeing kids trying to get involved in politics, which I think is a great thing. Now, do they have a lot to learn? Yeah, they're going to have a steep learning curve here. But, you know, when you're 16, 17, you haven't hit voting age yet. And so once they hit voting age, and let's understand something, if they're able to do something here and make inroads on firearms in this respect, what could be next on their hit list? Student loan debt? If you're politically activated, could this be a result? Will that mean they're going to take a greater role in trying to take control of the country? And I'm talking like 2024, 2028, that kind of thing. Because, you know, again, the Census Department says that between 2016 and 2020, 16 million new voters will be eligible to take their place. Now, what age group is that? Yet at the same time frame, 10 million voters are going to be, what age group is that? And so are you going to see a change perhaps in your political structure a few years down the road as long as this progression continues? Yeah, especially when some of the meetings I've gone to and I've heard some of the complaints of the young. Student loan debt, credit card debt, I got my degree, my job went over to, you know, wherever. And many of them believe that the promise of this country where each generation would better itself no longer exists. That's an issue here. And so what you're seeing now is going to help define what you're going to see 4 years, 8 years, 12 years down the road. The problem I have with that is 4 years, 8 years, 12 years down the road, if many of these young don't get what they want, what's going to happen here? Now, especially since we don't have a functioning system of representative government anymore. And many of these young, let's say they were born in 1997, all they know since the day they were born and were able to understand what was going on is war. That's all they know. That's all they know. And we're losing these wars by the old definition of winning. And so, and that goes back to something I mentioned earlier to somebody. Why, gee, you see, the administration wants to buy Greenland. I said, picture yourself living in Greenland. Why would you, for one reason, why would you want to give up the Danish medical system for America's? You've got to be deaf, dumb, and stupid. Jeez. Yes. Well, there is truth to that because, and I tell them, I said, because, well, do you know that there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people running for the presidency? And, you know, when you take a look on television, they're not going to be on the debates. I mean, a real debate should have been Trump, Hillary, Jill Stein, and Gary Johnson. That's not what Channel 2 wants. That's not what Channel 7 wants. That's not what Channel 4 wants, CNN or MSNBC. Remember what Les Moonves said from Channel 2. Gee, Trump might not be good for America, but he's great for CBS. In other words, we don't want real debates anymore because Democrats and Republicans run the debates. Remember when the League of Women Voters used to sponsor? That's out. That's out. That's out. And Democrats and Republicans are sponsored by who? Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, so on and so forth. Go down and look at where your elected officials are getting their money from. Some of them, you know, and some of them getting money, some Democrats, Republicans getting money from the same places. You got to be kidding me here. It's like the old Abbott and Costello shell game. But then again, are Democrats and Republicans really parties anymore when they're getting money from the same sources? That has to be called into question here. Right. And so I know when I left the Republicans, I was even asked by a couple of ex-mayors in Norwalk, oh, gee whiz, you left the Republican, you want to be a Democrat? No, why go from the frying pan to the fire? I'm not going to waste my time. It's a waste. And that's what some of these young say. It's a waste. I know a young Marine who was in Iraq, and he says, why do I want to vote for it? It doesn't do any good. They're going to have to be. They're going to have to be because they're not going to have a choice. They'll be moved by events. Isn't that what creates movements? Because they're moved by events. And many changes don't come from the top. They come from where? The bottom. They come from the bottom. And that's what you saw in 1776, 1789, 1917, so on and so forth. People wanting, of course, some of these movements wound up being what? Run by a dictator. But how do they start? And so I find all this fascinating here. That and so going back to the beginning, when I mentioned Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, those countries didn't have a track record of representative government. It's easier for somebody like a Mussolini or a Hitler to eventually take control. Russia, forget. They haven't had a representative government since they were founded, for crying out loud. 880 AD, Kiev and Rus. And you've had a revolving door of autocrats here. And forget, I remember the Bush administration coming out, of course, what do you expect from a C student from Yale? We're bringing democracy to Iraq. That's been a culture for over 4,000 years of authoritarian rule. You expect democracy in 5 years? What planet are you on? That's just for public consumption. That's all that was for. It was meaningless. Meaningless. So, it's a joke. It truly is. And so, but they're going to have to get engaged somewhere along the line. But when they get engaged, the idea should be, and I tell some of the young people this, get engaged, but create your own political agenda. Don't forget what the founders did, because the Constitution and Bill of Rights is your blueprint for your government. Don't forget that. It should be reapplied and then make the changes needed then. Because I tell them too, when I can get a chance to talk to them, remember what Thomas Jefferson wrote to Samuel Kercheval in 1816. He thought, and I think he acknowledges here, that the founders made a mistake. That yes, in 1816, every 19 or 20 years, or every generation perhaps, that the country should have a constitutional convention to update the document to the present generation. Because as Jefferson said, the present belongs to the living, not the dead. And not being stupid, he understood that the country in 1787 is not going to be the same country in 1857. It's not. And so maybe what worked for 3 million people might not quite work for what, 35 or 40 million? But the idea should be to keep the basis, but then acclimate it to the present agenda. Have we ever done that? No, we've added amendments periodically, but we really haven't done that. Yes? Well, that's the issue here. That's the issue here. Yeah, but but then again, when you have boards of ed like in Texas that want to take Helen Keller, Hillary Clinton, and Thomas Hobbes out of the agenda, they wanted to take Thomas Hobbes out and replace him with Moses. Holy Christmas! You got to be kidding me. Christmas, Moses. Yeah, okay. But I think when you see some of these kids get together. Even if they're prompted by somebody, at least they're not sitting there doing this. They're out there on a street, perhaps railing against guns, or for climate change, or whatever the case may be. At least some of them are getting engaged. Right. Well, then again, but which kids are they? Are they kids from the coast, or are they kids inland? It depends on where they are too, right? To a certain extent here. Yeah. But then again, you know, when you have movements like this, and I remember telling my wife, I told her the same thing my father told me, and it's true, that the mass doesn't think, individuals do. Look at history. And those individuals who know how to mold the mass, move it, whether for good or for bad. We've seen that. Yes. Yeah, they're down. They're obviously down south, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they actually travel the country, and they actually help inform police departments and law enforcement agencies on these questionable groups. They seem like they're getting more into also income inequality here. It's an interesting group to go on their website to take a look at them. And they're supported in certain aspects by like the Anti-Defamation League, Human Rights Watch, organizations like this. Yeah, they do. They do. Like to a certain extent, like the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, which one of the founders was Helen Keller. So yeah, it's you can go on when you go home. You can go onto their website. You'll find them right away. It's an interesting organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Disadvantaged people, that sort of thing. Income inequality. You're getting into that, right? So some of these groups are interesting, but I know a number of people who every year redo their membership to this, and they have a magazine they send out every month. I believe it is. If you're a member, you get the magazine every month. In fact, I get my blurbs from them like once a week, once every other week. They've got me on the list. So it's interesting. It's interesting to read what they put out. Yeah, they do. And I've seen them on television too. Some of their researchers that they interview on television. But some of these police departments hire them for background on hate groups and groups of this nature because they've done a lot of the research on them. Interesting organization. Interesting organization. Social media is one way. You know, like some of these terrorist groups like Islamic State. Al-Qaeda was doing this. You know, you can scour Facebook, things of this sort, and you can create like the intelligence or law enforcement services do, and they draw a picture of the person in question, and they scroll through these. They scroll through these. No. But some of these groups, ISIS used to do this. Used to scroll through these social media sites, and you know you begin to see with certain people you build a certain picture of that person. Maybe this person is ready to become a terrorist, or maybe this person is ready to become part of our hate group, whatever the case may be. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Right. Right. I mean, yeah, keep in mind, maybe you find one of your emails, which has an incoming email, which has gone to spam, you know, gee, buy this or join this or do this. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Well, yeah, I just delete and that's the end of it. And plus, some of those emails, I don't think I want to open them up. You know, just delete it. Because yeah, you don't want to be bombarded with this, with this worthless. Well, you know, it's a medium where yeah, gee, let's just blast this out. You know, but yeah, some of these savvy operators know how to use social media to draw certain people in, and then get them hooked. Yeah, they don't. Yeah, and it's in fact, law enforcement warns about this. You know, you need to inform your kids about this, or your grandkids, whatever the case may be, that these questionable sites, you don't want to get involved with them. Delete it. Turn it off. Get rid of it. So, yeah, Lost Horizons. Lost Horizons. I will be back in 3 weeks with another 4-talk set, The French Revolution. 3 weeks. Maximilian Robespierre, anybody? Otherwise, that's it. Have a good evening.